fly over these areas that are burned to the ground, you'll see in the midst of 20 homes that are just totally destroyed, one home sitting there because they had the right roof on it.
Yes, and by the way, if you notice you fly over in the helicopter, those places with good roofs, they didn't burn.
With the right materials.
Yeah.
Joe Biden's recent comments are alarming. The average person isn't supposed to know that the U.S. and Chinese military have been testing field-ready ground and space-based DEWs or directed energy weapons for at least a decade. Instead, we are supposed to sit down and shut up and believe it is a Jewish space laser conspiracy theory.
Can you tell me why so many people that support Donald Trump love conspiracy theories, including yourself? About Jewish space lasers. Tell us about Jewish space lasers.
Why don't you go talk about Jewish space lasers, and really, why don't you off? How about that?
According to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, directed energy weapons can produce force that ranges from deterrent to damaging to destructive. Many countries, including the U.S., are researching their use. Different types of electromagnetic energy have different properties. High-energy lasers produce a very narrow beam of light, usually in the infrared to visible region, and are typically used on one target at a time. The beam can be pulsed or continuous, generating a power output of at least 1 kilowatt. This output is 200,000 times greater than a typical laser pointer and is capable of melting steel.
These things pulse at different frequencies to optimize the damage.
Evidence of a CCP satellite over Maui is known.
There's 3 fires on the Maui Island. The first one that happened was on August 7 on the Olinda fire. That was a big one. And then what happened after that was the Lahaina fire. That was the nasty one that killed all those people. And the third one was the Kula fire, which happened after the Lahaina fire. So there's three blasts and 2 satellites, basically. 3 shots and 2 satellites is just too much of a coincidence for it not to be a DEW, basically.
As is the phenomenon of the lasers being unable to ignite the color blue.
And also the blue factor, too. I calculate this as a near infrared or near spectrum, and that's why it's not damaging blue colors.
That is overwhelming evidence that should be admissible in a court of law.
In China, the CCP now is just releasing data on their petawatt lasers. They're doing petawatt laser bursts on a laser that fits on a lab table. It's not a very big laser, basically, but when you have lasers of this energy, it's just instant damage. Very, very powerful lasers.
Some extraordinary damage in our state could be caused by hurricanes or tornadoes, and frequently when you see the aftermath of that damage, there's some semblance of a structure that is still there. When you look at the damages that have occurred here, it's just gone, completely gone.
And as we realize that the government is at the very least complicit, what makes you think that they wouldn't use DEWs supported by lawfare to drive people off their land, to cordon the population into smart cities in order to quicken United Nations Agenda 2030?
It's not something you see every day.
Oh, geez, it was, it went back and forth. At least, I would say 40 minutes to an hour.
But for people living in Cape Coral, they've been seeing it a lot this week.
It was really late at night. It was kind of around midnight. It was around midnight. And I was actually in my car. I was just getting home, and I saw it going back and forth with a laser beam, and it scanned over me multiple times, and it was just moving. It was scanning the whole area, every square footage, basically.
When it came by, you could see the green laser light spread out, like it was mapping. We were told it was mapping the area, is what we were told.
When you put the information Casey provided into the FAA website, it comes back with this information saying it's registered to Randigo LLC, but it's unclear who or what they're doing.
We just want to know what's going on, why we're being scanned.
Furthermore, wouldn't a covert satellite-based laser in concert with known weather modification technology capable of waging land theft and agricultural devastation benefit the Great Reset greatly by merely hiding behind the climate change narrative?
So essentially what this public-private partnership that the WEF is pushing for is for every person's access to the internet to be tied to a digital ID or a government-issued ID, but presumably a digital ID, just because of where government-issued ID programs are all going, essentially, around the world. people aren't necessarily going to consent to that unless they are made to believe that anonymity and privacy online are dangerous. So how exactly can you convince people that that needs to happen? Well, you have some sort of event where anonymous hackers do something online that causes major disruption globally, and then the consent can be manufactured through fear and panic, as is often done, that anonymity and privacy needs to be eliminated, that we need to know exactly who is doing what online to prevent a calamity of that scale from ever happening again. And this is the exact solution that these guys have been cooking for a very long time.
Hackers affiliated with China's People's Liberation Army have infiltrated critical services here in the U.S.
It was actually a very shocking result to us that there's a very few number of substations you need to take out in the entire United States to knock out the entire grid.
Knock out the entire grid?
That's correct.
How many would it take to knock out, putting the entire country in a blackout?
Less than 20.
That report was from 2013, and it actually found the number was even lower, 9. Taking out just 9 critical substations could black out the whole country.
This was a huge cyber attack in the panicked early days of targeting a $1.8 trillion government agency. The truth of it has never been reported.
This is the Department of Health and Human Services, and on March 16, 2020, they were going to full remote work. Network operators had to adjust all their firewall and security settings to allow hundreds of thousands of new unknown connections into their network, so they had to scale down their security all at the same time.
And that's when the attack struck.
China's preparing for war with the United States. The strategy here is that they want to be able to invade Taiwan. They're worried that the United States will project military power from bases in Hawaii and the continental United States to Asia to defend Taiwan. And so what China's trying to do is to do these cyber intrusions, lay in wait, and at the right moment attack ports, attack water supply, attack energy supplies to prevent the United States from projecting military power forward.
If you have an electric vehicle and you have the right equipment attached, you will be able to charge as you're driving.
That dynamic charging is a pilot program, so at first it'll only work for the fleet of test electric vehicles. But the end goal is for the expressway to charge all types of EVs.
And I think when this is done, this will be a leadership model for the rest of the world.
And they're putting power cables under the road, but don't worry, they said it's coming to a road near you, and they're going to do it on regular roads, so you don't have to pull over and charge. You just drive down the highway while all that radiation, same stuff comes out of power lines that it makes people sick on record.
So we're charging at 131 kilowatts here at a DC fast charger, and up close to the cable, we're getting a little bit higher, but that's very close, EMFs.
Meanwhile, this ties into it. Texas power plants have no responsibility to provide electricity.
We have a nuclear power plant offline because a water pump froze. We have coal plants offline because equipment froze or the coal piles froze. We have some solar panels covered in snow. We have some wind turbines coated in ice.
One woman in Texas filed a class action lawsuit against Texas power provider Griddy Energy after she was charged $9,500 for electricity during the week of the storm.
A new CBS report has found that the U.S. government's watch list has now grown to 2 million people.
And it has nearly doubled in size over just the last 6 years.
In the wake of the attacks in Israel, border officials say they've seen a growing number of people on the FBI watch list trying to enter the country through the southern border.
The figures show that in fiscal year 2023, CBP arrested a total of 154 non-citizens on the government's screening watch list. 151 of those individuals were arrested along the southern border. The numbers are up from 98 in the last fiscal year. The numbers represent a small fraction of all migrants processed at ports of entry.
We are right now in a very dangerous moment in the world, a very unstable situation.
News Nation has learned asylum seekers in New York City are going door to door looking for help on Staten Island.
The New World Order would have us believe that a black swan event is an unfortunate event created by the Russians, MAGA domestic or anonymous hackers, not a looming premeditated war game treasonous act by an establishment fueled by the insanity of a totalitarian eugenicist movement that is now careening off the tracks.
But we also have to look ahead, because you know what? Our opponents certainly are. Right-wing extremists already have a plan to literally steal the next presidential election. And they're not making a secret of it.
Larry Fink of BlackRock sent a letter out to the world saying that ESG is a priority for the asset manager and really was looking to encourage companies to embrace ESG.
I believe there will be a future, Eric, that all investments are going to be looked through sustainability.
The concept of providing Canadians with a universal basic income has sparked significant debate on if UBI is a viable solution for ensuring financial security.
The EU is investigating Elon Musk's X, formerly known as Twitter, while the bloc's regulator is probing the social media platform for its suspected failure to counter illicit content and disinformation, a lack of advertising transparency, and what it calls a suspected deceptive design of the user interface.
And of Homeland Security, the FBI, and law enforcement in the U.S., they're not a company founded by Americans, by the way. They're all like veterans and still active, more or less, of Israeli intelligence services. And they basically conducted these simulations of what types of hacks and events, cyber attacks, could trigger the cancellation of a U.S. presidential election and the declaration of martial law.
So remember how I said earlier in this speech that the farmers need to give up their farms before 2030, specifically that year? Yeah, so that's not a coincidence. That year doesn't come out of nowhere. So that year is basically the deadline that our global elites have given our country and will probably give you to abide by these new regulations. And that agenda is called the 2030 Agenda.
And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process.
He's talking about us essentially giving up individual national sovereignty and giving up individual freedoms and turning over rule to experts. The Great Reset, the World Economic Forum, this whole agenda is to make it so we have no choice on some of the biggest questions of our lives. But all of this is happening because at these meetings like the World Economic Forum and the United Nations, they meet and they work with government corporate collusion to bypass democracy. And in a simple sentence, the Great Reset is basically making the once free West copy the same model as one-party Chinese authoritarian rule. That is the Great Reset. They bypass democracy and impose stuff, and we get told what's happening. We don't get to vote on it. There's no hearings in Congress. There's no town halls. There's no switchboards lighting up for a big vote. None of it. We're just told. The car's gone. Your meat eating's going. Yeah. We're creating energy shortages. Sorry, your schools are closed. Sorry, your churches are closed. What? Huh? How did that happen? The Great Reset.
I spent quite a lot of time on the electromagnetic pulse, working with the governments to try to figure out how we would solve this issue. And I would say that the electromagnetic pulse, which is an EMP, which is basically a nuclear that goes off in the sky, shuts down the entire grid.
The very first strikes are high-altitude EMP attacks, frying electronics and power grids by creating an electromagnetic pulse of tens of thousands of volts per meter. The next strikes target command and control, as well as nuclear launch facilities. Land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles take about half an hour to arrive. Major cities are targeted, both because they contain military facilities and to stymie the enemy's post-war recovery.